Finally, American bombing has broken the Iraqi defense line on the northern front. Overnight, warplanes pounded the northeastern approaches to the city of Mosul. In daylight, we were able to move forward through positions and past bases which the Iraqi army had hastily abandoned. Then vehicles started racing past us, and we heard the sound of gunfire. Very suddenly, firing has broken out from just down the road ahead of us, where we had been told that the Iraqi army had pulled back. Then, a moment later, it started from behind us over there. We simply don't know at the moment who is firing who, but what we have seen on the road here is clear evidence of American airstrikes on a fleeing Iraqi army. The retreating Iraqis were blasted from the air. A rocket landed beside this truck and shredded it. The airstrikes were called in by US Special Forces troops, part of the small American contingent on the northern front. But Kurdish soldiers also played an important part. For the first time, they engaged the Iraqis and helped to drive them back. The Iraqis have abandoned key positions that they held doggedly for weeks, and the road to Mosul is now open. Julian Mannion, ITV News, on the northern front.
Another night, another raid, and another crack is made in the repressive and brutal state that is Saddam's Iraq. The Marines are targeting his henchmen in the south. They're being helped by Iraqi informers, like the man hidden behind the scarf and goggles, who identifies his town's tormentors, then slips away. Saddam's secret police and paramilitaries are being rounded up. The old regime disappears, a new dawn, and some Iraqis are glad to see the back of them. Saddam's loyalists here had taken off their uniforms and tried to fight the Marines with guerrilla tactics. Now, with their faces covered so they can't see the informers who identify them once again, they're taken away as prisoners of war. In this small town, at least, a few are gaining the courage to tear up the past.
In the old regime, our life was very badly. We can't say anything. We can't say anything or do anything.
I'm still scared.
For many, though, it's too early to show their face. Saddam's eyes and ears aren't gone here yet.
We suffer from the most terrorist political system in the world. We are destroyed totally, physically and psychologically.
What will people do to the Ba'ath Party officials if they catch them here?
All people think that they will punish them severely. They will kill them if they caught them.
So the Royal Marines here, now patrolling in berets, not body armour, may stand in the way of a bloodbath. There's no doubt that the Marines have subdued these towns in the south, that they dominate them militarily, but the battle to win over these people, to win their confidence, is still raging.
They're hedging their bets at the moment. That's why you don't see people on this town waving flags and jumping around. You know, they're hedging their bets. And quite frankly, I don't blame them.
Iraqis are nervous, wary of their new liberators, but for now their enemy's enemy is their friend, though their leader is not gone yet. Bill Neely, ITV News, with the Royal Marines in Qasr.
The advance to Baghdad was at high speed. The Americans crossing the Euphrates and the Tigris on two fronts, bypassing Karbala and Kut, the last major towns before the capital itself. North of Karbala, resistance was less than expected, with B-52 bombers and Apache helicopters backed up by British artillery attacking the Republican Guard, clearing the way for US infantry and Marines. Now they've crossed the Tigris in the east of the country, the Americans are on Highway 6 to Baghdad. The journey north, the fastest it's been since this land invasion began.
We waxed them pretty hard with the Cobras and tanks and upgun weapon systems, and the grunts are pushing forward for security. They're going to secure the base of the bridge on this side of the Tigris, and then Lima's going to push across and secure the far side. As soon as that's accomplished, the rest of the division will start rolling through.
For the first time, US ground troops are pushing back Republican Guard divisions. every coalition soldier nearing the capital now wearing protective boots in case of chemical attack. Coalition casualties are said to be light, but the Americans claim one Iraqi division, that's 12,000 men assuming full strength, has been destroyed.
When we say a unit is destroyed, another way to characterize it is it's no longer effective of conducting combat operations as a cohesive force. That means that its leadership is broken. That means that some of its equipment has been destroyed, or it can't be brought to bear in an organized fashion that will have a favorable outcome on the part of that force.
But hearts and minds are being won over during the great push north, children first to break the ice.
Shake, shake, shake your body. Shake, shake, shake your body.
As the convoys rumble ever closer towards the capital, this military campaign is no longer pausing for breath, but tightening the noose on its ultimate enemy. The Iraqis' only real hope now that tank battles eventually give way to street battles of such ferocity that Baghdad becomes the coalition's Stalingrad, with vast numbers of casualties driving the enemy back.
Over the canal bridge this morning, just west of Basra. A mile down the road, close to the British front lines, Iraqi mortars come in. Traffic spins and turns in a charge for safety. Moments later, British artillery opened up on the building from which they believe the mortars had been fired. The British attack, the Iraqis resist, the civilians get killed. Suddenly a man appears, desperate to retrieve his brother's body from near the building which the British have just shelled.
Can you speak? I need to chief. The major of this.
The army agrees not to fire whilst he and friends bring out the body, placing it at the roadside in relative safety for later collection. Civilians continue to move in and out of Basra. This is no siege, and among them today the Red Cross in a convoy. Aid agencies say the city hospitals are struggling to cope with the numbers of wounded civilians. Artillery and tanks outside Basra rely on SAS forward units operating undercover, as well as intelligence from questioning people at these road checks. Work interrupted by ill-directed and sporadic sniping.
Incoming, incoming.
Get the guys around the back. I want the two around the back, the one around the front.
Further south from the front, Mr. Jawad, like 1,000 other Mr. Jawads in southern Iraq, is suddenly interrupted by the British Army's search party.
Mr. Jawad there, he's very happy to let us in, invited us in. He understands it's as much for his own security as it is for ours. As I said, that the main threat here is people who are being coerced into complying with Fedayeen demands for hiding weapons and ammunition and helping their fighters.
Not everybody sees it Mr. Jawad's way, though. Take Safwan. Yesterday, the army gave us a propaganda video showing an arrest operation in the town, featuring a sniffer dog and resulting, they said, in 16 Ba'ath Party members being arrested. I found some of the town's elders having a smoke. Were they impressed? No, they said. The army have nicked the wrong blokes.
Go in his house, taking the man and his son and his brother.
Yesterday morning.
Yesterday morning.
Yesterday morning.
Yes.
The British say to us, because they do this because this man is with Saddam, he's with Ba'ath Party.
No. So we see it. We see him. No, for Saddam.
The army, however, were pretty relaxed about it all.
They weren't arrested for any length of time. They were arrested, interviewed and released and even brought back. So it's nothing that's inconvenienced them too much.
One tiny episode from Safwan, which illustrates that winning a war's relatively straightforward compared to winning over a people.
An incessant bombardment of the Medina Republican Guard. At times, the sky was almost crowded with rockets being fired. As tank units raced towards the city, rockets were still being fired in front of the column. Overhead, the last B-52 bomber was returning to base. The battle for Karbala was short, just 3 hours. We could see Iraqi positions burning. For the Americans, this was not the fight with the Republican Guards they anticipated. All around, we saw Iraqis with their hands raised. Some were forced to remove their clothing, such as the Americans fear they might be suicide bombers.
Gunshot wound to the leg here, okay?
Several Iraqis were injured in the fighting and were cared for by American soldiers. At least 30 Iraqis were killed. Once again, the plan was not to occupy the city, but to bypass it and isolate it. Tonight, white flags were flying in several neighborhoods. Other American units pushed further north. At Al-Quds, a key bridge was taken, and we understand some American troops say they can now see the lights of Baghdad. For the American commanders, today was the best day of the campaign so far. It has been a successful day for the Americans here in Karbala, but something of a mystery remains about what happened to the Republican Guard units. Have they simply faded away, or have some of them managed to withdraw into Baghdad for one final last stand? Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Karbala.
Operation. Street by street, they're now breaching the outer ring of defences around Baghdad. The Iraqi people may wonder what's happening, but the Americans are in no doubt. Saddam's regime has never been so threatened.
The dagger is clearly pointed at the heart of the regime right now and will remain pointed at it until the regime is gone.
So what does this dagger consist of? Well, we've seen the Americans pushing towards the capital, not to attack it, not yet anyway, but to attack Saddam's strongest forces. Now, some US troops are within 20 miles of the outskirts. Now, on the ground, the Republican Guard are deployed to guard the roads to the capital. One division, the Baghdad, is near Al-Quds. The US Marines moved up to confront it, and the coalition claims they've destroyed it, though it's not clear what that means. Two more Republican Guard divisions are north of Karbala, the Medina and the Nebuchadnezzar, both confronted by the US 3rd Infantry and its firepower. 200 Abrams tanks, over 200 fighting vehicles, 50 heavy guns, and 24 Apache gunships. The onslaught has begun, so the big question now is how will the Republican Guard respond? Saddam must hope he can rely on them. Many of these Republican Guard commanders come from his hometown, Tikrit, but their forces have been weakened by sanctions, and now their loyalty is really on trial. Their frontline positions are being hit by a massive surge in airstrikes. Bombers are attacking them more than ever before. This is a version of shock and awe. At lower level, Apache gunships are in action. The Pentagon claims 2 Republican Guard divisions are now effectively finished. But with the ground attack starting, the fear is that many units will simply melt away into the cities and fight there. The Americans have power and speed on their side, and the hope is that simply arriving outside Baghdad will destabilize Saddam. That's the hope. The big unknown is whether Saddam's best fighters, faced with this might, give up on him or strike back. David Schuckman, BBC News.
They don't sleep much in Basra. British guns pound away at targets through the night. And when dawn breaks, there is no respite. Here's what it looks like on the ground. Today, we were just a few hundred yards from where the British shells were landing, a building believed to be a base for Iraqi fighters. On the road right next to it, refugees fleeing from Basra accelerate away from the explosions. Time to put your foot down and to pray. Britain says militiamen are deliberately trying to get civilians caught in the crossfire.
I think that they're deliberately controlling traffic that way so that they're releasing civilians at a time that they want to launch an attack. So yes, they want people caught in the middle in the crossfire.
What do you think about that?
It's pretty sick.
This man's distraught. His brother's been killed in the crossfire. He asks British troops here to cease their fire so he can go and get the body. The corpse is retrieved from the roadside. This man died, it seems, as he was trying to change a tyre. British troops stop and search the exodus, looking for fighters and for weapons. All they find here are children, too young to know why this war is being waged, but old enough to find it utterly terrifying.
A lot of people coming out our family, so they're just trying to get out of it and stay out of trouble, I suppose.
They're frightened?
Frightened, I would say so, yeah. Definitely frightened. When the kids are coming through, you can see they're frightened. They won't even look at us, some of the kids, like.
Soon afterwards, we too were frightened. A mortar attack came in from the Iraqis. Anybody been injured here at all?
No, not really. Nobody's not. Incoming. Come on, in the ditch.
Several mortars landed near to us, one of them uncomfortably close. How close was that?
That was 30 metres just to our right there. Big mortar. So it's 81mm mortars coming at us.
The response is instant. British heavy armour advances and opens fire. British tanks are now firing into the buildings behind me. That's where they believe Iraqi fighters are still holding out and pouring mortar fire onto British positions here, as well as some sniper fire. The battle for Basra seems to be intensifying. Ben Brown, BBC News, outside Basra.
Somewhat, Michael. We are located about 70 kilometers away southeast, perhaps, of Baghdad, or we were. We've actually pushed on somewhat since that point. That's about 40 miles away from the city as the crow flies, which, of course, we're not. AlMonia is a military base. It was actually an Air Force base that was controlled at one time by the Iraqi Air Force. Yesterday, that was seized by members of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. It was basically secured at this point. Now it's been turned over to coalition hands, so it is quickly going to become a viable air operation base for helicopters. Whether it's going to be fixed wing, we don't know at this point, but we've already seen the equipment rolling in. As for the battle that appears to be shaping up in this area, and as you looked on the map, you can see probably why. We're very near the Tigris River. Submarine units already have crossed across the Tigris, as we have been told. But in the way is a Republican Guard unit known as the Baghdad Division. We are told that they have been degraded severely. Their fighting abilities have been reduced as a result of heavy aerial bombardment for the past couple of days. This morning, they took up that bombardment, this time from the ground, with howitzers, marine guns, firing what they call RAP, which is rocket-assisted projectiles. It's essentially an artillery round that's given a kick with a rocket engine. You could hear it going from behind us in this direction and flying directly over our heads, sounding like jet aircraft going over, and then impacting in generally about that direction, about 25, maybe 30 kilometers away. And then it got quiet, and then about 2 hours later, once it looked like ground forces were moving in, you heard the artillery open up again. Now it's gone quiet once more. We don't have a full picture as to exactly what's taking place, only that we know that this is, if there is opposition up there, as the gunfire suggests, the first opposition, the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines have met in a number of days. Otherwise, the Marines have been pushing directly forward with little or no interference from Iraqi forces. Michael?
Hornet jet. These pictures coming in from Iraqi television showing an aircraft. Now, very thin on detail here. We're not entirely sure even if that is the F-18. However, Iraqi television showing these pictures just a short time ago of a downed aircraft of some description, obviously impossible from that to see exactly what type of aircraft it is, whether it is in fact even a plane as opposed to a helicopter. Very difficult to tell from those pictures.
Defenders dancing round the wreckage of an American fighter plane shot down by a surface-to-air missile in southern Iraq. This is Iraqi satellite television. The announcer tells the audience the American jet fighter had completed a bombing raid on a residential area of Basra when it was downed. The US says it's deliberately avoiding civilian targets. It says a Hornet F18 Navy fighter from the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk was shot down yesterday, and that a search continues for the pilot. But the lost plane is an isolated Iraqi success. Iraqi soldiers are surrendering in sizable numbers in these video telephone pictures sent by a journalist with the US 1st Marine Division 60 miles from Baghdad, advancing on the capital from the southeast. While coalition forces approaching from the southwest, having secured a key bridge over the river Euphrates, are now a mere 6 miles from Baghdad. The lack of heavy resistance from Iraq's elite Republican Guards has led to anxieties that the Iraqis might want to lure the attackers into a chemical weapons trap inside the city's boundary.
RAF Tornado Base in northern Kuwait. The Iraqi border is about 50 kilometers that way. I'm just going to get Carl, the cameraman, just to pan to his left and just show you the scene here. You can see there those corrugated shelters. What happens is the Tornado aircraft go in there for a quick pit stop. They're refueled, rebombed, then the individual aeroplanes are married up with new flight crews. If Carl just goes to the right ever so slightly, you'll see there what the British forces did to those hangars when the Iraqis occupied this particular base where we are today in 1990-1991. Well, we're going to talk now to two gentlemen who should know exactly what's going on here, Squadron Leader Simon Ellard and Sergeant Dougal Gow. Simon, if I can come to you first, take us through why the Tornado is such a particularly special aeroplane as far as the reconnaissance missions are concerned.
That's, you're very right to point out that Tornado is capable of doing a large spectrum of roles. The majority of the operations here have been missions using precision-guided weapons, precision-guided bombs, which are very, very accurate and very effective indeed. In addition to that, you've mentioned we've been doing reconnaissance missions using a reconnaissance pod called Raptor. But furthermore, we're even able to use a missile called Alarm. That's an anti-radiation missile which is able to home in on radar emissions. And to top it all, we've even used operationally for the very first time a standoff cruise missile called Storm Shadow, which has turned out to be very, very effective.
In what particular way?
That's, the Storm Shadow is very useful because it's got a particularly long range, so that the aircraft are able to attack targets from a very large standoff distance. It's extremely accurate, and it has a very powerful warhead, which is capable of getting through several meters of concrete.
Dougal, coming to you. A particular high rate of sorties, 30 sorties in the past 24 hours or so. How do the personnel, how do the staff cope with that work rate?
Well, at the moment we're working a 12 hours on, 12 hours off shift, so they're flying 24 hours a day throughout the night, and we change shifts about 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. So the guys get 12 hours when they're back at the block, sleeping and eating when they can, and then they're back in here, and we just have to carry on get the aircraft turned as quickly as possible and get them back out again.
Isn't that emotionally and physically very, very draining, though?
Yes, it is. It's been emotional and physical for all of us, I think. The physical side is because obviously when you get back to the block, you've got a limited amount of time to get your food and then to go to bed. Before you know it, you're back in at work again, so it is quite tiring. There's no sort of relaxation period as such.
Simon, are you still going after Saddam Hussein's defence system as well, though?
We're attacking the whole spectrum of targets. Yes, using that whole spectrum of weapons that I mentioned earlier. That's the very special thing about Tornado, that we can use for just about everything.
And the pit stops, that takes place for the planes. We've heard what the pilots go through. Do you sense, though, that they can just keep this momentum, they can keep this level of commitment going?
Without doubt. What you must remember is that the conditions here and the operating environment isn't new to us at all. We've been operating from this particular base for at least the last 5 years, so we know the conditions, we know what the aircraft are capable of, we know exactly what we need to keep up this sustained rate of operations, and we've got everything in place.
And there's no shortage of anything coming through from the coalition forces further down the line?
No, we've been able to sustain this operations for some time now, and I can't see anything stopping us continuing at this rate.
How closely are you working with the Americans?
Here we occasionally help each other out. We've had some Americans in this morning purely for maintenance purposes. Sometimes they have something that's broken that they haven't got guys to fix. Sometimes we go to them for assistance as well. So it's quite a good relationship. We contact them quite regularly for little bits and pieces. Nothing major. We've obviously got everything we require here, but it's just minor things that they can't get hold of or we can't get hold of in a short period of time. We can help each other out.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.
It's early morning Thursday here in central Iraq, and at dawn, buses filled with military-aged men coming from Baghdad started approaching our lines, asking to surrender. It's been going on for the past 2 hours now. It started with a bus and a van. It is now several buses, and as I look down the road behind me, people are streaming out of the city just to our north and approaching our lines, asking to surrender. Most are military-age young men who say they are civilians, but you can see they have military boots, some of them have military belts, and they all have short haircuts, presuming that they are military who have been fleeing Baghdad. We were able to talk to one of the translators who said they left Baghdad last night. They got weekend passes from their officers who knew they would probably be deserting, and they are trying to make it to American lines where they feel they are safer, because if they stop at one of these towns, they'll be impressed back into service by the local political parties. This scene has been going on now for the past 2 hours. The Marines are trying to process as many as they possibly can. They found one AK-47 and one grenade, but by and large, everyone seems to be peaceful and trying to surrender. This is Mike Saray for ABC News.
Baghdad this morning, the sound of the encroaching battle. The front line is now on the southern edge of the capital as coalition forces prepare to fight for the international airport on the outskirts. The visible signs of Iraq's defences looked flimsy, to say the least. But the American military command said units from the 4 Republican Guard divisions were moving south from the capital to engage with the coalition forces. The northern push hasn't been without its losses. Pockets of resistance still very much in existence throughout central Iraq. Last night, an American Black Hawk was brought down in fighting near Karbala by small arms fire, killing 7 and wounding 4. The Pentagon said a search and rescue team was soon at the crash site. The Black Hawk, one of the Army's main utility and troop transport helicopters, can carry up to 11 soldiers. To the south, one of the USS Kitty Hawk's F-18 Hornets went down over Basra. Some reports claimed it was hit by a surface-to-air missile. The pilot has not yet been found.
On the ground, I've got to take out, and more importantly perhaps, one less piece that's going to be shooting.